The young and the restless spoilers shock in the dimly lit corridors of the Grand Phoenix. There was an energy brewing, one that hummed with anticipation and the unshakable feeling that something explosive was about to erupt. Phyllis Summers had always been a master of reinvention, of dancing the fine line between reinvention and manipulation. But this time, her pursuit wasn't just about power or revenge. It was about relevance. It was about placing herself at the center of something bigger, something potentially unstoppable. That something had a name, Cain Ashby. A name that once echoed with dignity and legacy had now become synonymous with mystery, silence, and the haunting possibility of rebellion. For Phyllis, the allure of Cain was not romantic, it was political, strategic, even spiritual. He was a man many feared but few understood, a man unbound by allegiance to the Newmans or the Abbotts, yet with enough knowledge and capability to destroy either dynasty if he chose. That danger was what made him appealing. Phyllis wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for a mirror, and in Cain's brutal pragmatism, she saw a version of herself that had long been caged by old loyalties and self-imposed restraint. The meeting with Amanda Sinclair hadn't been part of the original plan, but it became inevitable when whispers surfaced that Amanda had been moving in circles suspiciously close to Cain. Phyllis approached her with precision, not aggression. Amanda wasn't someone you cornered with threats. She was someone you disarmed with insinuations, with a friendly smile masking the venom underneath. So, when Phyllis sat down across from her with that falsely disarming glint in her eye, Amanda knew she was being tested. Phyllis wasted no time circling the subject, jumping straight to the heart of it. She wanted Cain, not romantically, but as a partner in chaos. She wanted Amanda to arrange the meeting, no excuses. Amanda pushed back, feigning neutrality, but the slight twitch in her lip betrayed the discomfort. She reminded Phyllis that Cain wasn't someone you just summoned. He chose when and where to appear. But that excuse didn't hold for long. As if scripted, Cain made his presence known, stepping into the room like a shadow breaking free from the corner of one's vision, wearing that same unreadable smirk that could mean trust or doom. Cain's arrival wasn't an answer, it was a test. He'd been listening, perhaps longer than Phyllis or Amanda realized. And now, standing before Phyllis, he offered no formal greeting, no handshake. Just a proposition, veiled in challenge. He was willing to listen. But only if Phyllis understood what it meant to truly play dirty. Not petty sabotage. Not petty revenge. But strategic annihilation. Cain's warning was cold but surgical. He reminded her that partnering with him meant abandoning every figment of morality, tethering her to old alliances. Could she betray Billy? Could she double-cross Nick? Could she sell out Jack if needed, not out of spite, but out of necessity? The names carried weight, each one tied to years of history, heartbreak, and half-repaired relationships. For a second, silence fell over Phyllis as if the weight of those names could force her spine to buckle. But she straightened. Her voice didn't shake. "Yes," she said. "I can betray any of them if that's what it takes to make you trust me. I don't need to be the queen. I'll settle for being your knight. I want in." The moment was electric, but beneath it pulsed an undercurrent of madness. Because Phyllis didn't just want in, she needed in. And that need was beginning to consume her. She had spent too long watching others carve out legacies while she played the part of the chaotic disruptor, the one everyone underestimated until it was too late. But she was tired of being underestimated. Tired of playing second fiddle to men who had repeatedly hurt her and women who pretended to be better than her. Phyllis wanted power, yes. But more than that, she wanted validation. And Cain, with all his cryptic plans and calculated isolation, had suddenly become the key. What she didn't realize was that Cain was playing a game within a game. He didn't believe in partnership. He believed in leverage. And Phyllis, with all her fire and desperation, was both a potential weapon and a potential threat. Back at the Abbott mansion, the ramifications of Phyllis's maneuvering began to ripple. Jack had always carried a torch for Phyllis, buried deep beneath layers of disappointment. But even he could feel that something in her energy had changed. She wasn't fighting for redemption anymore, she was fighting for access. Nick, on the other hand, had grown weary of Phyllis's unpredictability. To him, she was a beautiful storm, seductive but impossible to anchor. And Billy. Billy knew better than anyone what it meant when Phyllis started plotting behind closed doors. He'd been burned once. He wasn't ready to be burned again. Still, none of them truly understood the storm that was coming. Cain was already several steps ahead, and Phyllis, willingly or not, was just another pawn being moved across his board. Meanwhile, Amanda's loyalties were splintering. She had warned Cain not to trust Phyllis, but part of her wondered if she was just projecting her own fears. Because in some twisted way, Amanda understood Phyllis. She, too, had once sacrificed integrity for ambition. She had watched Phyllis manipulate truth like an artist with paint, making lies look like loyalty and betrayal feel like salvation. So when Amanda returned to her suite and found a new envelope from Cain slipped under the door, no message, just coordinates and a time, she knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about business anymore. Cain was putting the pieces together. And Phyllis, whether she realized it or not, was stepping into the center of a war far more ruthless than she was prepared for. Days passed, and whispers began to circulate across Genoa City. People were talking about a new alliance forming in the shadows. Victor Newman, always attuned to shifts in power, summoned his private investigator. He had seen what happened when Phyllis allied herself with dangerous men before. And if Cain was really building something, then Victor needed to know what side of history she intended to fall on. Victoria, too, began asking questions, not because she feared Phyllis, but because she feared that any chaos Phyllis unleashed would inevitably reach the walls of Newman Enterprises. The Abbotts and the Newmans had spent years fighting each other. A new wildcard like Cain, armed with Phyllis's cunning, could shatter them both. And Cain knew it. What Phyllis couldn't know, was that Cain had already betrayed her in small, nearly invisible ways. Each meeting they had, each flirtation with danger, each whispered promise of power, he documented it, recorded it, stored it away like weapons in an arsenal. If Phyllis ever turned on him, or worse, if she ever got too close to the truth of what he was really planning, he would burn her down before she had the chance. To Cain, alliances were transactional, not emotional. He didn't trust Phyllis, not truly. But he respected her desperation. Because desperation made people dangerous. And dangerous people made excellent distractions while the real players moved unseen. But then came the night at society. A gala. A celebration of nothing in particular. The usual crowd gathered: Devon, Lily, Abby, Kyle, Jack, Summer, Nate. But when Phyllis arrived, something in her gaze pierced deeper than vanity. She was hunting. She made her way to Cain's table with a grace that masked calculation. They shared a toast, but it was not to new beginnings. It was a quiet declaration of war against a world that had discarded them both. And as Amanda watched from a distance, she realized something terrifying. Phyllis was no longer pretending. She wasn't caught in a lie. She was fully immersed in it. She believed in the partnership, in the chaos, in the destruction of everything she once claimed to love. And perhaps that belief was the most dangerous thing of all. Because when Phyllis believed, truly believed, there were no lines she wouldn't cross. For months now, Genoa City had been moving beneath the surface like a glacier, quiet, slow, and menacing. The cracks forming under the elite weren't obvious, not yet. But those who paid attention, the ones who lived not just on wealth but on intuition, could feel something unnatural stirring. And at the center of it all stood Cain Ashby, no longer a predictable executive or a scorned husband, but a specter, a man who had disappeared from the public eye only to return with a cold purpose that no one could quite name. His motivations were obscured in silence, but his movements were deliberate, almost surgical. He no longer confided in Amanda, the woman who had once served as his moral compass and legal protector. He no longer shared war stories or ambitions with Holden, his so-called trusted partner. Everything now moved through him, around him, but never into him. Cain had become a fortress with no doors, only mirrored walls. The more people tried to reach him, the more they were left questioning whether they had been speaking to the man or to the myth he had carefully cultivated. But there was one force that even the most carefully laid plans couldn't ignore: Phyllis Summers. She didn't arrive in Cain's world as a wrecking ball. She came as a whisper, a suggestion, a seductive shadow offering insight and allegiance. But those who had watched her rise and fall over the decades knew better. Phyllis was never just an opportunist. She was a survivor. And survivors don't attach themselves to sinking ships, they find the leak and use it to sink the fleet. So when she began inserting herself into Cain's orbit, offering cooperation, affection, curiosity. It wasn't affection she was after. It was access. Phyllis had mastered the art of playing every side of a conflict until she could reshape the entire board to her liking. This time, her mission was twofold: seduce Cain into trusting her, and infiltrate his unspoken operation on behalf of the only two men she had never fully let go, Billy and Nick. The problem was, no one, including Phyllis herself, could tell where her loyalty truly rested. She wasn't lying when she told Cain she was willing to betray Billy or Nick if needed. But that wasn't because she had lost affection for them. It was because she had lost patience with waiting. She needed results. And if betrayal was the bridge, then so be it. The Abbotts and the Newmans had always used her, always underestimated her, always judged her for being too emotional or too volatile. But now she had the chance to be their secret weapon, the woman who could crawl inside the enemy camp and dismantle it from within. That's what Billy and Nick wanted, at least that's what she told herself. That's what she promised in hushed phone calls and encrypted texts. But as her involvement with Cain deepened, that script began to erode. Because Cain wasn't just some misguided megalomaniac. He was building something. And Phyllis could feel it. Still, Cain wasn't blind. He knew what Phyllis was. He watched her flit between seduction and sarcasm, between confession and control. And while he never explicitly called her out, he planted just enough doubt to keep her off balance. He'd make references to her past with Jack, her tumultuous relationship with Nick, her history of betrayal and reinvention. He knew she was a mole, perhaps even a double agent. And yet, he kept her close, dangling vague opportunities, speaking in riddles, offering just enough of a glimpse into his mind to keep her engaged but never enough to gain a foothold. He was teaching her a lesson, that no matter how well she played the game, she wasn't the one writing the rules. Back at Newman Tower, Victor was growing increasingly impatient. He had tolerated Phyllis's chaotic brilliance before, sometimes even admired it. But this time, her infiltration into Cain's world wasn't a curiosity. It was a threat. The old man didn't trust Cain. He never had. Not when he was married to Lily. Not when he tried to carve out influence through Jabot's shifting leadership. And certainly not now that he had returned with the aura of a silent kingmaker. Victor suspected, knew, that Cain was aiming for something far larger than a hostile takeover or a revenge plot. This wasn't personal. This was structural. It was about undoing the very foundations that kept Newman Enterprises and Jabot at the top of Genoa City's food chain. And if Phyllis was caught in the middle, she would be the first to burn if the house collapsed. Billy, for his part, had his doubts too. Though he had asked Phyllis to get close to Cain, the intensity with which she had committed to the assignment alarmed him. She had stopped reporting back with regularity. Her answers were vague, her tone increasingly ambiguous. And when he pressed her about whether she was still loyal, she simply smiled and asked if he ever really thought she wasn't. It wasn't a denial, it was a dare. And Billy hated dares. Because he knew he couldn't trust her, not completely. Not ever. But he also couldn't afford to lose her. because the deeper she went, the more Cain seemed to open doors that no one else could even see. Meanwhile, in an upscale suite at the Grand Phoenix, Amanda Sinclair stared out the window, her mind swimming with unanswered questions. She had always trusted her gut, and her gut had been screaming for weeks. Something was wrong with Cain. Not just wrong, off. He wasn't manic or broken. He was evolved. Cold. Strategic. His silences were sharper now. His smiles emptier. The man she once defended in court was now someone she barely recognized. And the fact that he had stopped confiding in her, stopped needing her, was more alarming than any villainous plan could have been. She had seen him become dangerous before, but never this calculated. And she feared that whatever he was building, it wasn't just about taking down Billy or Jack or Victor. It was about setting fire to everything they believed in. As for Holden, his role in Cain's world was perhaps the most enigmatic. On paper, he was a loyal lieutenant, a quiet strategist who followed orders and executed with precision. But recently, Cain had begun to exclude him from core meetings, limit his access, and reassign sensitive tasks to third parties. Holden noticed. And he didn't like it. He began his own investigation, subtly tracking Phyllis's movements, comparing them with Cain's schedule, creating a map of connections that led to one disturbing conclusion: Cain was playing everyone, including him. And if Holden's loyalty was ever truly tested, he knew what side he would fall on. Because unlike Cain, Holden had limits. And unlike Phyllis, he had nothing to prove. Only something to protect. And then came the night of the confrontation. Phyllis, emboldened by a recent conversation with Amanda, approached Cain in private. She demanded to know the truth, why he had isolated himself, why he had shut out the very people who could help him. She pressed him about his targets. Was it really about Billy? About Victor? About Devon? Or was there something deeper, something buried beneath the decades of perceived betrayal and professional exile? Cain listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned in close and said only one thing: the game I'm playing doesn't require pieces. It requires pawns who think they're queens. Phyllis recoiled, stunned. Was that a confession? A threat? An insult? Or all three? She couldn't tell. And for the first time, she questioned whether she was still in control of him, of herself, of the narrative she had spent so long constructing. She left that night without saying another word, her heels echoing like gunshots across the marble floor. But Cain remained seated, unmoved, his fingers tracing a pattern on the table's edge like a man rehearsing an inevitable endgame. Because while everyone around him scrambled to decode his next move, Cain had already decided. The real trap wasn't the one Phyllis had set. It was the one she had walked into, along with Billy, Jack, Nick, and every other so-called titan of Genoa City. And when the dominoes began to fall, no one would be able to say they hadn't been warned. They just hadn't been listening. Let me know if you want to continue this storyline with a specific twist, like Phyllis secretly falling for Cain, Amanda defecting to Cain's side, or a shocking reveal involving Newman finances or Chancellor secrets. I can keep expanding.